Karl, you've been living in Malta for a number of years now, and you've also worked extensively at a very high level in the international financial industry. Maybe you could tell me a little bit more about what you think the Maltese investor wants and perhaps should be doing and is not.
But maybe before we go to the investor, let's say what's really different about Malta from other places I've seen. One is clearly there is a lot of money. The Maltese are a nation of savers. Now, usually when you work in the international markets, the Italians kind of rank quite highly as well. They have a very high savings ratio in terms of the fraction of their disposable income that ends up in a bank account for the very, very long term is very high. What I really was surprised was that when I came to Malta, it's even more. It's even more, and you can see that feeding through the whole banking system in a way, because Maltese banks have, relatively speaking, much more deposits than they give loans. So they're sitting on excess cash, almost literally not knowing what to do with it. And that cash sits with the central bank, sits on government bonds, and that's effectively money on which the bank is losing money. In fact, it's the investor, because they simply don't want your money. Okay, so you're going to get very low interest rates compared to elsewhere. Now, what is definitely clear is that foreigners who come to Malta to maybe establish a business there, and people that generally Malta as a country wants to attract, find it difficult to open bank accounts because their money is simply superfluous to what's needed in the system. Right. How does it affect the banks? In some sense, the banks are a lot safer for not lending out so much, on having it on the central bank and the government. And in some sense, they're more systemically exposed, because now their loans are all 99% or so are in the real estate sector, right? Mortgages and towards developers, and the rest really sits with the central bank and the government. So there's very little diversification if something rather unusual were to happen to the monetary system. But what I used to say, for example, in 2008, before banks realized that the financial crisis was brewing, early 2008 therefore, I would say in hindsight, we now know Malta was probably one of the most robust banking systems, more robust even than Canada. And the contrast of Canada and all the other countries that we sort of saw almost going to the dogs was huge. And Malta, I think, was through skill or luck, was in an even better position because the local banks were run very conservatively.
So let me rephrase that. You're saying that Maltese banks are very good for the return of one's money, but might not be as good for the return on one's money.
We've got it up to here.
But is that any different from anywhere else at the moment?
Absolutely, yeah. Cash in the bank has always been a dreadful investment when you look over the very, very long run.
Yes, for sure.
Right? So that's another reason to really find alternatives.
So we're back to the usual age-old argument of diversification in the end, that we should have some bank deposits because that's good and they're safe. The Maltese banking system is safe, but other than the kind of savings for a really rainy day, you need to look for other sources of return on your portfolio.
You have certain goals, certain objectives, and cash in the bank is there to fulfill some of them. Like the need for liquidity, what did you say, the cover for a rainy day, right? But really, if you have that extra cushion that you don't strictly need to have in the bank because you may not need it tomorrow, then for the long term, you're much better off to have it in the real economy, right? And getting into the real economy does not mean deposits. It actually also does not mean bonds, right? It means equities, shares on the stock market, or property. And even there, I think a mix of both.
Yes.
Cash in the bank we've discussed what it's for, right? Bonds They give you more interest, but they give you less liquidity.
Mhm.
But essentially, they're not all that different from cash in the bank. They've
Right.
got a little bit more risk attached and
Mhm.
more return.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Equity is what really makes sure that when everybody gets richer, you're not getting poorer by comparison.
Right.
Which is, when you look back the last 200 years, has happened to people who invested in bonds or cash in the bank,
Mm-hmm.
with the single exception of the last 20 years, where bond investors did really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
But that's an absolute exception to the rule. The one instrument that makes sure that your purchasing power,
Mm-hmm.
right, so the value of your money stays the same,
Mm-hmm.
is equities
Mm-hmm.
and property, right? And there the main difference is property is tangible. You know what you're getting, all the mistakes and all the successes that you will make are probably yours.
Mm-hmm.
But it's illiquid. It's very
Very
very high transaction costs,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you really want to know you can afford to stay in it for a very long
Mhm.
run. Whereas equities ultimately achieve the very same purpose and are supremely liquid, right? So if you need the money tomorrow, you can have it tomorrow.
Yeah, not to mention that most people would buy a house anyway to live in. So for the average person, their exposure, their personal exposure to property is already quite large without owning a second one.
Large and often leveraged, because they may have a mortgage.
Precisely.
Right.
So isn't the fact that the Maltese investor tends towards safer investments, and assuming that the Maltese investor is, a small, is an entrepreneurial type, his income is rather unpredictable, isn't the fact that he would tend towards safer investments logical?
Yes, I think for a self-employed entrepreneur who does not necessarily have much visibility of future income or predictability, it absolutely makes sense to have some safe cushion somewhere, right, in terms of investments. But when you look at employees, for example, right, people who have relatively good predictability of future income, especially if they are young, they should be taking a lot more risk than what I see the Maltese taking.
Right.
Simply because when you look at all your spending that you have to do throughout the rest of your life, which is really what investments are for, right? You're going to cover that mostly through working, and not so much through investing at the early stages in your life, and you know that. So your capacity to work and to continue to work for the next 30, 40 years is worth a tremendous amount compared to your financial wealth potentially. If you are in that position, you really should take a lot more risk with your financial wealth, simply because you can afford it. Right? It's not a safety cushion. Your ability to work is your safety cushion. Conversely, as you approach retirement, or maybe you're already in retirement, or maybe you are an entrepreneur who is already taking a lot of risks with their time,
Right.
with the investment of time and investing their skills into something. That's very different.
Right.
Let's take the extreme example of somebody who is not working, who is no longer an entrepreneur, who's 70 years old and just wants to take it easy and lives off his wealth. If such a person were to lose 15% of their net assets, and yet they rely for their income on drawing down on those investments, then to finance their income they would have to eat substantially more into the capital after a drop, just to maintain expenses. People should de-risk later on in life, because literally if you lose 15%, let's say, of your assets, you might lose 30 or 35% of the years that the money will last.
Right. What we can see then is that actually an investor's portfolio should really be tailor-made to his personal circumstances, which, we keep hearing kind of it's the end of the advisor, and and the advisor is no longer necessary, and it's probably possible to calculate mathematically very well, but nevertheless you do need someone for the average investor to be able to say, listen, this is the plan and this is what it should look like and this is where you should be.
Nicky, we are professionals, right? It's hard even for us to stick to what we know when it comes to our money.
Right.
So you don't just need an advisor. You need, even I need a kind of coach who tells me what I already know to make sure that I actually end up doing it.
Right.
Because there's always tempting things. It's like, oh, there's a great opportunity here. There's a great opportunity there, and then you end up with the wrong overall portfolio.
Right.
Which means you've got all your eggs in one basket. There's certain risks that suddenly start to scare you, and it's all not necessary because you were chasing dreams that at the time looked really good. So for that discipline, it's like going to the gym. You should be going to the gym. You don't need somebody telling you that.
There is a function.
In reality, a very good financial advisor is a kind of lifestyle coach, right? Because it's not just about where do I invest my financial assets. It's where do I invest my time? Where do I invest, my dreams, my energy, all these resources that I carry around in my daily life. Right? I want to invest into something that's going to give me something back. A financial advisor, yes, he helps you deal with your assets and putting your risks where they should be taken and eliminating the risks where you can't afford them. But I think he also helps you to deal with with the time that you're given on this planet a lot better, because we waste a lot of time chasing investments.
You've actually outlined something here, which is a kind of a shift from the mentality that that's been prevalent, say, 10 years ago and before that. Well, actually, it's probably still prevalent today, where the advisor was essentially a salesman, and that salesman was there to stuff the investor as much as possible with the highest paying commissionable products that he could find on his shelf. Are we out of the woods yet, or are we getting to the?
No, I don't think we're out of the woods yet. And I've both worked as an investment banker and as an asset manager. So I think I've worked for the dark side and then, and then seen the light. We've seen terrible abuses outside Malta in the past, where of financial advisors, were just purely driven by the bottom line.
Yeah.
And usually you get that as soon as an advisor company gets to beyond 3 individuals, that pressure starts to build.
Right.
There's some financial officer breathing down their neck and say, you've got to give me the numbers.
Yeah.
And so just be careful about that. That's the same with doctors, by the way. When you go to doctors supplied by the insurance company, who may have a network of 30 or 40 of them, you're not going to get the same kind of independence that you get from the guy around the corner who doesn't just do it for the money.
Right.
All I can say is trust is very important, and if in doubt, get a second or a third opinion.
Right.
It's exactly what you do with doctors. Do the same with financial advice. That would be my advice. And if there's any doubt in your mind that whether you're getting what's best for you rather than best for the firm that the person works for.
No, I've always been very skeptical when I've walked into a financial advisor, and the first thing that they tell me before I've even sat down is, what product is good for you? It's this one. How can you know that if you have only just met me? So this is it continues in what?
Well, it depends, but it's again the bigger organizations, they have a flavor of the month that goes through. There's special incentives for the workforce to sell exactly that. There are often very simple, hidden, mechanical reasons of why people favor giving you a particular product over favoring to give you real advice.
Right. If investors aren't getting a good enough return from the Maltese banks, isn't the obvious solution to invest into the Maltese bond market as an alternative?
No, not really. Ultimately, there's a certain number of borrowers in this country, and a demand for borrowing money, and there's a certain amount of investors in this country who have a demand to put their money somewhere. And it doesn't matter whether I'm competing against that imbalanced pool of other co-investors,
Right.
all chasing Maltese opportunities to invest through the intermediary of a bank, or by directly buying bonds and financing the borrowers that
Right.
way. There's a limited number of borrowers chased by an excessive number of investors, and I choose to be one of them if I participate in the local market. The safety valve is really investment abroad.
So let me make that in simple terms. Basically, this is one market, and the prices are going to be high in the whole across the market,
returns are low,
irrespective.
and therefore the returns are going to be low.
Right.
I
So
mean,
what are the alternatives?
One thing that has become extremely interesting to me is to see, since the financial crisis, how regulations have driven entire sectors of global lending activity out of the banking system, and therefore made that sector much more attractive for investors, because basically certain types of borrowers cannot get their money from any bank at all anymore. Right? We're talking about container ships, we're talking about aircraft leasing, we're talking about international trade finance, we're talking about asset-backed finance.
So this is a huge sector of the economy.
A huge sector of the economy that is really struggling to get access to bank finance, which means obviously they are happy to pay higher returns to find that money, those loans elsewhere. And what we often call the shadow banking system, but really it's private investors, often through hedge funds or through their financial advisors, are taking these opportunities for safe is perhaps too strong a word.
Right.
But, you know,
Risk-adjusted word.
risk-attractive returns, where, you know, on asset-backed finance, on art finance, on wine finance, gold, trade finance, you know, you're looking at returns of 12% or so.
And these are secured loans.
These are secured loans, but defaults do happen, right? But defaults would probably happen 1 or 2% of the time, and you have the asset, which backs up the loan.
Yeah.
So there's a complexity involved in these transactions, and often it's easier to pool several investors into one vehicle.
Right.
But opportunities are there for a simple structural reason that banks are no longer allowed to play a game that is not just attractive to play, but is actually essential to the economy.
Right. So basically, these situations exist, not because they should exist on a market basis, but because they're forced to exist by the regulators and by the new rules implemented, or rather designed since the crisis, which has had quite a few unintended consequences. It was meant to solve one set of parameters, and yet ended up opening. Or rather closing doors to the banks on parts of their everyday business.
I think you can say in a nutshell what's happened is, yes, we have made the banking system safer. We have made the banking system more boring in the process.
Right.
We've made it harder for certain sectors of the economy to access the banking system, and that produces very interesting opportunities.